Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Niko and I wanted to speak to you today about something that has been on my mind and heavy on my heart, like I know it has a lot of people, and that is some of the misconceptions we get about race. Now, there are a lot of people who seem to believe and want to convince the rest of the world, especially people of color, that if you call out a racial incident where you see it, then you are what is called quote-unquote race baiting. Now, as you probably know at this point, that is usually a term only used by conservative white males and every now and then conservative white female. And unfortunately, it's become the norm to try to justify racial acts or racially charged acts in conflicts by saying that, well, maybe this person of color was acting out of line, which is already a no-no. Like, if you tell a person of color that they're quote-unquote acting out of line, especially in situations where they may fear for their life or where they were literally just a bystander, that is the first thing that will get you attacked. But they want to convince the rest of the world to assume that people are just normal and that race isn't that big of a problem anymore, and that if we would just stop looking at race, racism would disappear. And I hate to break it to a lot of people, but that's simply not the case. The fact of the matter is, the reason that racial tension died down so much, especially during the time of the civil rights movement, was because we finally started looking at race and the implications that being a certain race have on people. And when we do that, it makes the situation more humanistic, as in you start to see, like, you're looking at people are looked at as being a color, and when they're associated with that color, they're looked at as behaving a certain way or filling a certain stereotype, which is usually not true in a lot of ways. Stereotypes can be true because they usually follow trends, but the negative stereotypes, especially in today's society, usually are not true per se. So I think one thing that leads to this misconception is that a lot of the time, people who say that we shouldn't apply race in a lot of issues that obviously include racism are the fact that they think that the people who commit racial acts are rational actors, right? So they're saying, well, maybe this action led to this action, led to them behaving a certain way, and that's why they've acted out and lashed out against this particular person of color, especially black men. That is a false assumption. To assume that most people in America are rational actors is a completely false assumption. If you're a psych major, I know you can attest to this. It's like something over 50% of American citizens have mental health issues. Over 50%. That doesn't even categorize or codify the severity of their mental health issues. So you're automatically having that's already a false premise, assuming that they're rational actors. It's one key reason why people don't understand the implications that race really and truly has in a situation. Another key reason that people don't understand is because they don't understand their past and they don't truly understand where this country comes from. A lot of people can quote to you history, but they don't quote to you what the implication of certain historic events has on the psyche of society. Now, remember what I just said. A lot of people assume that people are rational actors in America, and they are in fact not. This is why it is so important to remember that. There was a study conducted between 1960 and 1970 where they asked teenagers, where do you get the majority of your political views? The people, 77% of these teenagers said that they get their political views from their parents. Why is that a problem, ladies and gentlemen? And this is white people, by the way. This is a study specifically conducted on white people. Why is that a problem? That is a problem because we know for a fact that literally a generation before that, and for some people, depending on which state you lived in, there was segregation. That was a thing. Jim Crow laws, that was a thing. Blatant and absurd amounts of racism were things. Like prejudice was a thing. Oh my God, a generation, 2 years before that, 3 years before that, during that time period, those kids said that they align mostly 77% with their parents, and 70% of those said that their parents were conservative. Now, we know what conservative means politically, but we also have a very good idea what conservative tends to mean sociologically. So let's keep that in mind. 70% of people got their views from their parents, right? Once again, that is playing into the fact that people aren't acting rationally, because if they were acting rationally, they would get their information objectively collected, apply their own personal experience with the experiences of others and the facts surrounding them, and then come to a rational decision about where they may align politically. But if you're saying people are too lazy to decide whether they are conservative or liberal or what, Republican or Democrat or independent, that actually is a huge problem, because that means people are not going out of their way to look for the facts. They're not going out of their way to make logical conclusions. They're not going out of their way to actually think about the implications of racism in our society. So that's already two things: the fallacy that people are rational thinkers, and the fallacy that most people get their political views from their parents. Now, the people who acquire these teenagers acquire their political views from, which obviously, as we know at that time, at least half of the country was racist as hell, right? Like I said, segregation was a thing. So these are teachers. These are politicians. These are police officers. These are people who literally hate black people simply because they were taught to hate black people. That's a problem. Once again, because they're the ones who are in power, because at the time, black males and black females and other persons of color were not allowed to maintain positions of power. So because of the people in power at the time, actually holding absurd amounts of racism in their heart, they were implementing laws and policies and passing down ideologies of racism. They made sure that black people couldn't reach a certain standard, and every time we did reach a certain standard, we would be immediately smashed. If you don't know what I'm referring to, look up the Wilmington Massacre of North Carolina, look up Wall Street, look up Black Wall Street of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and there are several other examples of where every time a black community was thriving, they would get immediately smashed by the white communities surrounding them. So if they are the ones who hold inherent power, and the only thing that we can do is we're essentially getting seconds at this point, right? And not even seconds, we're like getting last at this point, because even if I became a police officer, the police officers that came before me were all white. So I can be a chocolate chip in a bottle or a case of Cool Whip, but that isn't then going to turn the Cool Whip brown and make everybody have an understanding of what it feels like to be a black man, right? So I think that that's also something that nobody tends to think about. And we're in a country, we have literally politicians coming out and openly saying they want to go back. They want to make America white again. Okay, so let's keep it hot. Racism is still a significant issue, and power structures are one of the things that continue to make racism an issue. As long as we have politicians saying, I want to make America white again, and they are still in office, that lets you know, especially I believe this was either a governor or a senator, I cannot remember, but he's not the only one. But we have governors and senators and representatives who get to say stuff like that, and they're still in office, or they get elected to office. Or we have somebody like Trump who gets half of the Republicans, more than half, like 60% of the Republicans, or people who think like Trump, which is even worse, to vote for him. And now he is a major political candidate. So that's the thing, right? So power structures, white power structures, and how they trickle down through time. I know you Reagan people love that trickle down economics, right? Anyway, but white power structures and how the results of white power structure have trickled down through time. White power structures, I'm about to caveat from white power structures. So white power structures a lot of the time come from white money, and which essentially acted as a barrier to black people and entertainment industries, music industry, big businesses, things like that. So we can take, just because I love rap, Jay-Z for example. Jay-Z sold drugs. This isn't news, but Jay-Z made it very clear that he actually only sold drugs because he was a businessman, and he knew that the only way you can build a successful business and a mega business was to have capital. Unfortunately, black people, especially black men from the hood, with poor parents, historically had no way to gain the type of capital you need to have a successful multi-million-dollar business. Not everybody gets to be Donald Trump and take out $1 million loan from their father, from their parents. Okay, that's reality. That was reality. So Jay-Z took the capital he did, and he invested in himself, and he invested in other artists. Why is this significant? Because at the time, the producers were all white. The producers, the networkers, the people who could get you into the nice clubs in New York and Florida and LA and all that stuff, they were all white. The club owners were all white. The people who owned the studios that you had to go pay studio time to, they were all white. And black people were constantly and consistently getting cheated out of money as entertainers because they were all white. The people that they worked for and were giving a large chunk of their money to were all white. We actually still have this situation and issue, and to a large effect today. So they were all white, right? So Jay-Z did something absolutely extraordinary for a black entertainer, which was because of what he did, he took his money and made himself a business, and he made other black males business like their own conglomerates. Like it's a pretty amazing thing. But the problem is there's still not enough, right? And so because of that, we still, like, for example, in Hollywood, we still get portrayed as the gangster. Very rarely do we get portrayed as a person who saves the day, or the person who has a good business, or the person who has a very secure and holistic nuclear family. It's always the single father or the single mother struggling. It's always the slave. It's always light skin versus dark skin. It's always how black men are unfaithful to their wives. That's the image that is portrayed of us. It's always, we gotta be gangster, we gotta dress this way, we gotta talk this way. That is how we're portrayed. And we all know the effect that entertainment, especially Hollywood entertainment, has on the way society thinks. It forms it forms our trends. It tells people how to think, how to dress, how to talk, how to act, how to look, what to eat, what not to eat. It causes half of a lot of mental disorders that we have today. Like, legitimately, even like, think of it like this: eating disorders, and where they stem from. And they don't stem because somebody woke up and said, I want to be skinny, let me have an eating disorder. A lot of the time, the eating disorders come from the images that come from our entertainment. So the entertainment even subliminally implants messages into our brains on what we think a person may or may not act like, what we think a person should or shouldn't do, or should or shouldn't get away with, or we think we understand why people end up in the situation they end up in. So you have all of that. And the white power structure is the one who controls the entertainment, because it's not black people. It's, hell, I'll be surprised if it's any other race. Like, even Bollywood strives to attain a lot of their their video, like what they believe is entertainment from white culture, and like Hollywood, which is essentially white culture. That's facts. These are facts. So when you include all of that from the beginning, assuming that Americans are rational thinkers, assuming that Americans are rational thinkers, not accounting for the fact that most people get their ideology, the entirety of their ideology from their parents, so that makes people inherently lazy and makes way for a lot of confirmation bias. When you talk about the white power structure that put people that were racist in power and made policies to make sure, and made policies, and then people convinced themselves and others that those policies were okay because black people were lesser. Then you talk about the fact that everything around us is telling us that black people are bad. where we fit, you know, one of several stereotypes, and usually most of them are negative. You can't act like racism is not going to manifest, and you can't act like the implications of racism aren't real. And if you do, you're acting like a naive child.